Today on Trucks, Stacey's going from this to this as he finishes up Project PreRunner by adding a 5.5-inch lift front and rear. Then it's Mad Max Revisited. We're taking the blown street sweeper out to do a little pavement cleaning. And finally, Stacey's taking us out to a truck show to check out new parts in truck gear. That's all today on Trucks.
Anybody interested in a 69 Camaro? Got the pink slip right here. What was the guy thinking? There's a blower sticking 2 feet out of the hood. Hey, welcome to Trucks. More on the street sweeper later on. Last week we started Project PreRunner, which is a 95 Ford Ranger. We're going to do a whole desert treatment on it. Now the first thing we did was pull off all 4 fenders, put on these big flared fiberglass guys to give us some room for big tires and suspension. That's what we're going to deal with today, tires and suspension. Now, for those of you that don't know, the PreRunner or desert style truck is an awesome off-road vehicle, but it's a complete departure to off-roading. Now here's probably what you're used to. Trail riding or rock crawling is usually about conquering impossible obstacles and of course going where no one else can. This involves slow speed, big old tires, and of course low gearing.
Bobby, get you some!
PreRunners, on the other hand, are all about speed, ground clearance, and massive wheel travel. They have to be able to run fast and hit everything from rocks to bushes to deep trenches and gullies and keep on going. Now that sounds like a pretty tall order, and it is, but we've got it covered, and I'm going to show you how after I get this thing in the air and get the tires off of it. All right, the kit that I'm going to use is from FabTech Motorsports, and it's going to give us a 5.5-inch lift, and that's a lot for a Ford Ranger. Now, the kit comes with 2 massive I-beams, extended radius arms and their mounting brackets, coil springs, new coil spring buckets, and integral dual shock hoops, performance shocks, and of course a whole bunch of hardware. Now I know this looks like a pretty difficult install, but it's really not that bad, and I'm going to prove it to you. The first thing that we'll do is unhook this brake line because we're going to need longer hoses, and those come with the kit. Just make sure that you cap the line so you don't have brake fluid dripping all over the place. Then support the I-beam with a floor jack. Next, pull out the shocks and remove the sway bar. Now, separate the tie rod ends from the spindles. Finally, separate the spindle assembly from the I-beam and set it out of the way. Now we're ready to get those coil springs out of there. And that is very easy because on this application you don't need a spring compressor because the spring is bolted to the I-beam. So once you have the nut loose, go ahead and lower the jack. Notice how the spring releases. Then just take off the nut and remove the spring. Then unbolt the I-beam and remove it from the truck. Finally, out comes the radius arm. The last thing that we'll do is take off this tie rod end so we can remove this adjuster sleeve and replace it with this much larger one that comes with the kit. All right, this is where things get a little more serious because we have to get rid of these original coil spring buckets to make room for the new ones. So using a grinder, we're going to knock off the heads of all these rivets and then we'll be able to just pry it out. The new coil spring bucket bolts right to the frame rail using these original holes from the old rivets. Check this out. Nice, clean installation. But before you bolt it on, make sure that you paint the frame with a good rust-inhibitive paint, especially where you have bare metal, because moisture will get back there behind that bucket, cause the frame to rust. With the main bolts in place, all you have to do is come out here, drill down through these holes, bolt it on. That takes care of the shock hoops and the spring cup. Now, you want to make sure that there are no fuel lines inside the frame rail before you start drilling. Also, if you're going to use any kind of shrouding in here, make sure it tucks back behind the shock hoops. Next, we're ready for the new radius arms. Now check this out. There is no way that these new ones are going to fit where these old stockers were. These are considerably longer, and that's going to give us way more wheel travel. And I'll explain a little more of that here in a minute. What I want to show you right now is the difference in design and construction of these two parts. This, because of its tubular design, is going to be way stronger, and of course it looks a lot better too. Okay, to relocate the radius arm, this old cross member's got to come out, which means out comes the trusty grinder to knock off the heads of these rivets. Now, getting a grinder up into some of these tight spots is going to be a little tough, so if you have access to an air chisel, now's the time to use it. Then we'll clamp the new bracket in place according to the measurements from FabTech. That's right on the money. Then we'll just drill the holes, bolt it on. Next, we'll grease up the urethane bushings to keep them from squeaking. Then, lightly bolt the radius arms on, and that brings us up to the brake. But after the brake, we're going to put on those great big I-beams and finish this thing up, so you've got about 2 minutes to go to the bathroom and get a drink, and then get back here. And if you don't make it, I'm going to start without you.
Next, more cool parts are on tap for Project PreRunner as we get closer to finishing. And later, it was inspired by a movie, but there are no special effects. It's the Street Sweeper, and it's all horsepower.
Hey, you made it! Welcome back to Trucks and Project PreRunner. We're doing a 5.5-inch lift on a Ford Ranger. Now, like I said before the break, it is now time for these big custom I-beams. As you can see, these are a lot bigger than anything that came stock on a little Ford Ranger. They've also got greasable bushings, so you get good maintenance and long life there. But unlike these custom radius arms that have their own special mount, these guys bolt right in place of the stock ones. All right, now a lot of people are not real familiar with the twin I-beam style suspension, and it's definitely got its pros and cons, so I'm going to fill you in on it a little bit. Now, Ford built this style suspension from the 60s all the way into the 90s, and it's a good suspension, unless you wanted to modify it. Then it was kind of a pain in the butt, and here's why. Your camber was set from the factory at ride height, so if you try to lower the truck, your camber goes way negative. Now that not only looks bad, it doesn't ride very well either. Now, if you tried to lift the truck, same thing. The camber went way positive. So the only way to do it right is to put on custom I-beams. And of course, those are expensive. Those are the cons. Now, the pros is the strength of this I-beam radius arm configuration, and also the amazing amounts of wheel travel that you can get. Now, those are both important when you got 4 wheels in the air. With the new I-beam and the radius arm in place, it's time for the new coil springs. Now, just like everything else with this kit, these absolutely dwarf what came in here originally. If you need a little reminder, check this out. Man, that's sick. I love it. All right, with the spring in place, just rotate it to seat it into the pocket up here, and then bolt it in at the bottom. Then, jack up the I-beam, and mount the J-clip to the top of the spring bucket. Now this keeps the spring from coming out of the pocket even if you're airborne and the suspension's at full droop. The next thing to go on are the shocks, and they run side by side from the radius arm all the way up to the hoop. Now we're ready to install the spindle assembly and the new alignment cam. Now you've got to have one of these because that's how you adjust your caster and camber. And of course, it also comes with the kit. Now, a couple things here. You want to make sure and re-grease your bottom ball joint. And also, now is a good time to check your brakes and replace them if they're bad. Looks like we need a brake job. Moving on, we'll reconnect the tie rod end. Make sure that you grease this thing. Finally, put on the longer braided stainless steel brake hoses. Now make sure that you wire tie these up out of the way because you don't want your tire to get into them when you're turning. Now that will pretty much take care of this side. All you have to do is exactly the same thing over on the other side. I'll tell you what, while I finish up here, why don't you step back, take a really good look at what a difference a 5.5-inch lift makes over stock. Once the front end is lifted, it's time to tackle the rear, and it is going to be a breeze, especially since we've got the bed off this thing. Now, the first thing that you always do is put a jack under the rear end to support it. Then, remove the sway bar, shocks, then pop off the U-bolts and finally remove the leaf springs. The FabTech kit gets its whole lift in the rear with just a set of springs. I mean, no blocks, no extended shackles, just springs. As you can see, they don't even look like they're for the same truck. Now, the old ones have 3 leaves, the new ones have 6 leaves, and they also have a military-style double wrap on the front for safety. You can see that the bushings are already installed, so putting these in is a matter of just putting them in. Follow that with the new shocks, and that takes care of the lift on the rear. See? Easy. But you're not completely done yet. You do need to check a few things. So, with the rear end at full droop, you need to make sure you don't have any binding in your brake hoses or your emergency brake cables. That looks good. All right, now we come to one of my favorite parts of any buildup, and that is the wheels and tires, because that is such a major part of the whole look and attitude of a truck. And when it's right, oh man, it's right. When it's bad, dorky. So to make ours right, we went to Weld Racing and got a set of their super strong sidewinders. Now the size is 15x8, back spacing is 3 5/8. This is important because if you go any bigger, believe it or not, you're going to have some clearance problems. Now Weld also gives you some choices for center caps. For that, we're going to use this really cool dome style that covers the lug nuts. That looks awesome. Now for tires, we went to Mickey Thompson, got a set of these Baja Radial MTXs, the size 33/12/50. Now these are a great all-around tire and they should be able to handle anything I throw at them. All right, with the new wheels and tires on and the spare in the bed and the bed back on the truck, you can see that the body and suspension are done on the PreRunner, except for paint. But these things are awesome, man. I love these things. And they're a ball to drive, and I'm going to show that to you here in the next few weeks. The question is, would you rather have cool or stock?
Next, Stacey's got his hands full as he's rawhiding that big, bad, blown street sweeper. Just can't get enough of trucks? Check us out online at truckstv.com.
Welcome back to Trucks. You know, people are always asking, how do you build a really cool truck? Something that'll win some shows, but more importantly, that'll just knock people's socks off when they see it. Well, the secret is to have a direction or a theme for the buildup. So you don't just have a hodgepodge of parts that don't really work together. Now, a prime example of how to do that right is with Larry and Sandy Henniger's insanely wicked 71 Ranchero. Now, the direction behind the buildup on this truck was very simple. neck-snapping brute force and an over-the-top, in-your-face attitude, pretty much like the V8 Interceptor vehicle in the movie Mad Max. Larry started by taking a truck with an already evil-looking front end and shaved off the front bumper and blended it all in, slick as glass. And rumbling under the hood is a very nasty 351 Cleveland Kiesler racing engine that so dominates the engine bay that you almost forget to notice just how detailed everything is. Almost. Of course, on the other side of the hood is the rest of the engine that towers 2 feet above the hood line in the form of a 671 Huffer and dual quads. Now, this motor combination from both sides of the hood cranks out over 600 horsepower to about 3 miles to the gallon, which means this truck will pretty much pass everything but a gas station. Still not enough attitude for you? Well, the massive blower is further enhanced by a subtle 3-inch chop and shaved door handles. Inside those doors are black leather bucket seats, flame door panels, and a custom dash and console stuffed with gauges to keep you informed when you need that gas station. A wild butterfly steering wheel gives the pilot something to hold on to when he uncorks this sucker. Of course, the wood grain siding that once ran down the side of this truck has been discarded, and all 126 holes were welded up and finished to perfection for a smooth, glassy look. The smoothness continues into the rear with a custom roll pan and taillights and a message, just in case you're wondering. Now, a wooden bed floor is not usually found in a Ranchero, but one was added to put just the right finishing touch on the tail end. The best part about this truck, though, is the effect that it has on people when they see it. They'll stare, they'll point, some will drool, others will try to look away and can't because this thing just draws them like a magnet. And should anybody be crazy enough to try a challenge, well, they'll quickly find out this thing definitely has the muscle to go with the look. Matter of fact, if I had to describe this truck in just 2 words, I'd use 2 right from the movie Mad Max. The blower! The blower!
After the break, Stacey hits the truck show circuit to find what's cool and what's hot in truck gear. And now truck gear, parts, tools, and equipment for pickups and sport utilities.
Hey, for today's truck gear, I thought we'd do something a little different and take you out of the studio and show you what you'd find out at a truck show. Like this. I need this. Too expensive. Now, if you're thinking about putting an independent suspension in the rear of your truck, you need to check this out from Heights Hot Rod Shop. Now, for those of you in the know, you might think it looks kind of like an old Jag setup with coilover shocks and inboard brakes, but they make their own center chunk, which holds the center section of a 9-inch Ford. You know how strong those are. Now, the magic of this kit is it comes with the cross members that makes mounting this in the frame a whole lot easier than putting in an old Jag or Corvette setup. Now, the price to start at these, just under $4,000, Heights Hot Rod Shop is where you gotta go. Now, you've all heard of the product that you supposedly can paint right over rust and it'll stop it dead in its tracks. Well, does it exist? Yes, it's called POR 15. POR stands for paint over rust. Now, as you can see, this piece is rusted to the point of being pitted. Now, it's been sprayed with POR 15, and you can literally beat the crap out of that and still not have it chip off. Now, it's also very flexible, so it won't come off even if the metal bends. Now, POR 15 is not cheap, it's 88 bucks a gallon, but you get what you pay for. All right, so you need an engine for your new project and you gotta have a Chevy. Well, if you go to GM Performance Parts, you can get the 330 horsepower crate motor, or you can get the 350 horsepower fuel injected 350 crate motor, or if that's not enough, you got the 385 horsepower 350. Now, of course, if you believe that bigger is better, check out the new 502 502. Now, everybody's always telling me how they'd love to build a street rod pickup, but there's no steel bodies out there. Well, you're in luck, because Brookville Roadsters now has an all-steel 3031 Ford Roadster pickup body. Now, this thing's been extended 6 inches in the cab area to give you a little bit more leg room, but the bed's been shortened so it still fits on a stock chassis. And it looks a lot better this way too. Now the bed and body combination goes for about $5,200, and for an all-steel body, that's a smoking deal. Well, what do you think of that? I thought you'd like it, but if you thought that was cool, you wait till you see what I got for you next week.
Next week on Trucks, it's one of the most popular projects Stacey has ever built, and you've waited a long time to see it finished. So next week is your chance. On roads, mud, and even water, we're pushing Project Wicked Willie's to the very edge to see if it will run as good as it looks. That's all next week on Trucks. For a VHS copy of today's show, call toll-free 1-877-853-7260. Show videos are just $12.95 plus shipping and handling. Trucks is an RTM production.